Welcome, guys, to another edition of the CEO Wisdom Pod. We have Peter Birch with us today. He is CEO, founder, and podcast host at Talking Health Tech. This podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast like this one, you can go to podfire.com. These podcasts are super useful to me. I learn tons from them. I network with some people, grow my network also because I get leads and clients from these. And you can do the same. I can help you with that, podfire.com. Peter, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit more about Talking Health Tech?
Sure thing, mate. Thanks for having me on the show. So my name's Peter Birch. I'm based here in Sydney, Australia. I've worked within the healthcare and healthcare technology space for the past 20, 25 years. And I used to work for a lot of larger organizations, like bigger corporates. And then about 5 to 7 years ago, I moved into more in the startup health tech life. And in all of these roles, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not a doctor or a nurse. I've just worked within operations and general management type roles, doing the doing and making sure things happen, and helping founders realize their vision. So operationalizing and executing stuff. So then in the startup health tech life, I really enjoyed being the jack of all trades, doing the finding the office and getting the first hires and convincing investors things were a good idea, and then doing the sales and doing the customer service and fixing the Wi-Fi, taking the rubbish out, all the things that you do in a startup. And then but I also then spun up this podcast called Talking Health Tech on the side while working in the space, and that was back in 2018. Since then, there's been 380 something episodes of the podcast. We do 2 a week. And it's my full-time thing now. So we do a lot of content and community about technology and healthcare.
Why did you decide to start a podcast? What was your thesis back then?
Yeah, back then, so working within the healthcare space, within our particularly healthcare technology in our little niche of health tech, I felt it was a lot of people trying to do very similar things in terms of improving patient outcomes and reducing costs in the healthcare system, but everyone's operating in their own little bubbles and their own silos. And I'd go to one meeting or a coffee with someone and think, oh, well, that's a really interesting insight they've provided. But over here, in the startup space or in the finance side, they don't really think about that. So I became this kind of one-to-one connector, and I thought, well, there's an opportunity to do this at scale. Also, I used to do a lot of community radio and enjoyed doing things back in the day before podcasting was kind of a thing, and I did that in my local community. So bringing these two kind of capabilities together, and creating content that was pretty niche at the time for healthcare technology in the Australian space. And since then, we've broadened to quite a global audience, but we've always been, global from the Australian health tech professionals' perspective. So since then, it's really resonated with people in our little niche area. And whilst we don't get the downloads that, Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan or this show might get, we will still resonate quite deeply with those that are making a real impact in healthcare technology.
And tell me about the startup scene in Australia when it comes to health tech, and what's the total number of CEOs in that field? 3,000? Would that be an accurate number?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's interesting you ask about specifically startups in health tech, because it's an area that is definitely an opportunity for particularly clinicians that are feeling problems firsthand, that are like, well, I'm doing the same thing. It's monotonous, or I'm not seeing outcomes and it can be heart-wrenching seeing patients go through a lot of challenges, going through a difficult system, and technology can play a huge role in shaping that. And we're in an area where we're getting older and more chronic disease, and there's longer lifespan, so and less clinicians to actually do a lot of the caring because it's taking a drain on people. So there's big problems to solve. So there's more and more startups that are spinning up, becoming, it might be a single clinician that might build a little lab on the side, and then it comes into, and they're working, seeing patients full time and then doing something on the weekend. But then also a lot of people coming from outside of healthcare and we saw a big surge in that through COVID and the pandemic, and a lot of people coming in to try and solve some of these opportunities as funding came in to do telehealth and other bits and pieces. So the startup space in Australia is definitely really interesting. And you think more in the biotech and science side, we're really good at that kind of stuff here in Australia, with universities creating new solutions in the bio and pharma and devices space. The real challenge, I think, is then taking an innovation, an idea, which might just come off the back of research and in the lab, and actually then commercialize it and get it in front of clinicians and patients.
So I had the CEO of MacuJect the other day. He's also in Sydney. Maybe you know him personally, but yeah, it seems that Australia is somewhat similar to Canada in terms of R&D and the government helping the startups there. I could see that scene potentially burgeoning, and his story was quite great. You know, he used to do like hundreds of eye surgery on a daily basis and thought, why not AI to do that? Any other stories that you've seen on your side of health tech, med tech being used to save life, quite literally?
Absolutely. And Devinder, I think it is the CEO of
Chauhan, yeah.
Yeah. So no, and it's funny, the Australian healthcare, health tech space is big, but also, everyone kind of knows everyone as well. So that's really nice. And it is an area that has an opportunity to have great impact. And it's been interesting from my side too, in doing Talking Health Tech for the past 5 years, where we've started to broaden out into another kind of parallel industry as well in agriculture technology, so ag tech. So we've got another podcast within our podcast network called Talking Ag Tech, and that area just interests me as well in terms of it's so there's a lot of similarities and parallels with healthcare and agriculture. It impacts every human. Every human has an interaction with the healthcare system, but also every human has an interaction with agriculture as the output of food and how we consume things. But you think about the sustainability of a lot of those things, and from a consumer side, there's a lot to do. But within the industry in agriculture, it's similar challenges with healthcare too. Here in Australia, it's such an important industry, but it's the industry trying to solve problems within the industry. Not a great deal of innovation and interest in funding for those things. But there's some great solutions coming out. But a lot of family businesses that are created, and there's this opportunity for technology to come in too. So these big problems in industries that might be complex around regulation and privacy and standards, and I guess if you get some of these things wrong, there are big implications. So I'm hoping that our platform can hopefully demystify some of these things, and it makes it a bit more accessible and interesting for people from outside the space that might want to come in and learn a bit more.
Right. And what do you have next for the podcast in terms of innovation? How do you keep on making better?
Yeah. Well, we're doing 2 episodes a week, and in terms of the creating the content, we're doing more and more video content, so video first content, doing recordings out and about. We produce 8 other shows in addition to Talking Health Tech. So we've got a podcast network that I mentioned, so creating a platform for other groups and podcasts to speak to an audience of people who are interested in healthcare innovation. In terms of what we're talking about on the podcast, like artificial intelligence obviously comes up a lot in terms of an interesting area. But what I do like the most in terms of conversations on the Talking Health Tech podcast, we don't go too much down. It hasn't become like a generative AI podcast, like a lot of podcasts have become. It all of a sudden becomes everything. Let's talk about large language models and generative AI. There's an element of that, but I'm really interested in patient stories and the impact that it has on end consumers and the impact it has on the clinicians, because we need to come back to basics and get the workflows right and get the regulatory kind of hurdles sorted and get even if we have all of the standards and the system and the data flow seamlessly and there's all these cool in the end, healthcare is a human to human interaction, and it will always be that way, and technology can be the enabler to do that better, but we can't lose sight of that. So that's a lot of the themes that come out on a day-to-day.
When do you think AI would, let's start with the computer side of things. When do you think AI would become the doctor's full-time assistant? And when do you think AI would fully replace a doctor?
I think there's a lot of healthcare providers that already use artificial intelligence as their assistant, particularly in areas that require more pattern recognition for diagnostics, like skin cancer and anything you get an X-ray for and all that kind of stuff. So AI can certainly help triage and speed up that process, but in the end, a clinician's got to provide that services. So I think that will continue, and there's great uses for AI in doing that, either from a the diagnostic side, as I mentioned, either from the back end like admin side, because there's a lot of admin and finances and stuff that slows things down in healthcare. So AI definitely has a role to play there. And also in terms of engaging with patients too, and getting them, I guess, providing more education and serving up stuff that's actually useful. In terms of to your second part of your question on when will it replace clinicians and when will humans just get healthcare provided by computers or by AI, I don't think that'll happen. And I don't think we'll ever get to a point where the broader the global community will be accepting of healthcare services that are solely delivered by AI and ML. There are pockets of I think what we're very good at in any industry is thinking that our little bubble and our sphere of influence is what the globe represents. There are still many communities, even just here in Australia, we've got such a great healthcare system where those that are receiving the care don't even want to receive an SMS or a text message. They want to pick up the phone and they want to receive stuff in the post and they want to see a human face to face. And while those things aren't efficient, they're all surrounding around points around trust and credibility, all these human things that we need to be able to survive. So if we got to a point where humans fully trusted in artificial intelligence and the computers and there was that credibility there, but there won't be a point, I believe, that is wholly and solely the way that everything is done. There'll always be a human interaction that takes place in healthcare.
And robotics, I mean, theoretically, there could be a robot that would be better at human stuff than humans. That is, if they learn faster, better, and stronger, sort of at greater scale. So when do you think there would be like an automated bot doing the surgery?
Well, yeah, so robotics in surgery is a really interesting area, I think, and it has got great application, great use and potential here in Australia. We've got a very large size of the country, but then we're very spread out in terms of where people live. And so, your really skilled surgeons, they aren't in all the places that people need surgery. And it's not feasible for someone to travel 8 hours to go and get surgery all the time. So having robotic surgery, there's plenty of examples of it being done in practice and seeing, a clinician, a surgeon doing surgery on someone from, say, here in Sydney to over in another location. But a lot of it is kind of theoretical because there's still, we need the infrastructure to get that right in terms of connectivity. Australia is really low on the list in terms of reliable internet speeds, and we're going to need the systems and the standards to get all the data right, because there's all different technologies that are used in different locations, and then all the kind of ramifications and things that happen before, during, and after surgery as well. So it's fine to say, we'll use robotics to control some arms to do, say precision surgery, which is actually a really good use of robotics. But then how did the patient get prepped beforehand? How do they get the care afterwards? So there's that big picture of the patient journey that needs to be taken into consideration. But absolutely, some of these technologies have got a huge role to play.
On the podcasting side of things, how do you select your guests?
So for the Talking Health Tech podcast, the main one, we actually lean into our THD Plus community as the first preference. So we've got our membership community of companies that are looking to take things to the next level and want to promote the work they're doing. They have a presence on our website and they can post content like news, events, and jobs, which we then redistribute back through our audience. We've got a lot of reputable, not just startups and technology companies, a lot of healthcare providers are THD Plus members, and also a lot of those institutions and industry bodies like the Australian Digital Health Agency, Medical Software Industry Association, a lot of accelerators and incubators and investors are members as well. So we use that as the first priority because I love the concept of, and it comes back to the reason why I started the podcast in the first place, which is to build a concept of community around a lot of this content. So if we've got those that are really interested in participating by hopefully giving a little bit more than they take within the community as well. And so we like to check in with our company members each year and yes, hear what's happening within their sphere of influence, but also understand from them what they can teach others within the space. We also have a lot of individual members that are part of the THD Plus community. We hold quarterly summits, like virtual events for our members, and we've got a community forum, and we do a lot of warm introductions and matchups. So hopefully there's a lot of free, so on our website, there's a lot of free content in terms of the podcast and our glossary of terms. Great way for anyone to learn about what's going on. But then for those that want to take things to the next level, they can become a THD Plus member and get across what's happening in the health tech space.
And then once you have the guest on, how do you make sure to ask them the good questions and keep the conversation flowing in a sense that would be appealing to the audience?
Sure thing. Well, I guess from my own experience, I've worked within the space for 25 years and have a good understanding of what's happening within the healthcare technology side. So someone from outside the space might ask a surface level question. I can really get down into, well, in terms of how that might be implemented and what about these challenges. Now, and it's not just me now that's doing the interviews on the Talking Health Tech podcast too. We've got a growing little band of THD ambassadors, we say, and all of them are at the moment clinicians that are providing healthcare on the front line. They're also THD Plus members that are facilitating these conversations too. So we've just started doing that now, actually, and that's been really interesting. But what I love about those conversations is that it's always a conversation with somebody who's experienced this firsthand, and they're asking, if you were from outside of the space, we still try and make it interesting and understandable too. So it doesn't feel like you have to be in the little click to know. But I think we found this nice balance of asking the dumb questions in inverted commas for someone that might not actually know, what the FHIR standard is, or what artificial intelligence actually is, and all that kind of stuff. But then actually get to the next level around, the steps for a successful implementation of technology in a public hospital, and all these other kind of specific questions that might come up. So I think bringing our industry knowledge has been a huge advantage.
Then you have a bunch of other pods that you're starting. I see here AgTech one, the Good GP, and so forth. How do you pick out these new niches, and what's your process to launch new podcasts?
Yeah, so that's been really fun, building out the Talking Health Tech podcast network. So some of those shows, like the Good GP that you brought out, for example, that's 3 GPs, so family doctors, that have been running that podcast since 2016, and they did that with the support of the college here in Australia, the RACGP, and that's where doctors have their support as industry professionals. But they've moved from being supported from the RACGP through to Talking Health Tech now, and so they're continuing to run their own podcast through our platform. So we know that's like the leading podcast for GPs in Australia, and getting their fast-paced education. We've got other shows like the CCIM podcast, the Creative Careers in Medicine show, which is helping clinicians think a bit more broadly about their career. So it's really about like career guidance and thinking, hey, I don't have to be a clinician, 80 hours a week seeing patients nonstop. I still value the patient engagement, but maybe they want to start a new a new technology, but it doesn't have to be technology based either. They could be doing some really interesting artistic things. Just hearing those stories is really great. And that addresses a real big problem in healthcare that we've identified on the main show, like that clinicians are getting burnt out there, where we can't keep sustaining healthcare without clinicians on the front line. So giving them an outlet to do that is really cool. I love it. And so we've just put out a poll actually that finishes today on LinkedIn, asking the community about what's the next topic that they're really keen to hear about. Some of those shows we'll produce ourselves. At the moment, it's neck and neck between having a patient stories podcast versus a purely show for startups and sharing their journeys. So we're open to new ideas in terms of shows that resonate with our Talking Health Tech broader audience, and it does address this issue that does come up from time to time. Since we speak to such a broad range of people on the Talking Health Tech podcast, whether it's startup founders, tech vendors, hospital executives, investors, that's good in terms of getting all those different voices together, and that's why it was started in the first place. But sometimes it's really hard. I can't say, this is our single avatar of the person that's listening to the Talking Health Tech podcast. Not every podcast episode would be relevant for absolutely everyone, and that's okay. And we do find a lot of people will listen just to hear what's going on. But I love that we can start spinning up shows that are really specific to practice managers or doctors or investors, and that list will continue to grow.
You also organize events and you put panelists together. So I'm about to put my first online panel together. What advice would you have for me on that level?
That virtual events are really cool, and we continue to do virtual events for our quarterly virtual summits that we run. So they're for our THD Plus members, and people can buy tickets to attend as well. We get good engagement at those. So and the reason we keep them virtual, and I guess my advice around putting together a virtual event would be spend as much time on the guests, spend as much time on the attendees as you do on the guests as well. So speak like not just putting panelists up and saying, well, this is what they are, and hoping people kind of work out why that's of value. We spend a lot of time going direct to our members saying, we think this will be of value to you because we're speaking about these things and we know that that's important to you. And the reason why that's important for a THT summit is what makes ours special, I think, is we get such good engagement in the chat during a panel that it really starts to shape the conversation. It feels like those people attending live are shaping how the conversation goes. So there's always like 3 or 4 questions that are prepared, but it always kind of goes out the window because the attendees are as much part of the conversation as well. And so we've got some funky graphics and comments coming up live on screen. So it's the closest thing you're going to get to a Twitch live stream in the health tech space, that's for sure.
Interesting. Yeah. And tell me about the community backend you're trying to build. Because I have my masterminds. I have a bunch of editions that are free. I still handpick all my members. And I have paid editions of the masterminds. It's 5 CEOs talking on a monthly basis on a Zoom call. So tell me about how you manage your community. What tech do you use? What channels do you use? And how to make sure it is burgeoning?
Yeah, sure. So with our membership, we've played with different offerings as part of our THT Plus membership. And like I mentioned, there's something for individuals and there's something for companies. And the companies is all about promotion. There's a lot about promotion for them, about having a directory listing on the website, sharing content, all that kind of stuff. But we still call that the startup and the scale up membership. For the solo membership, you get included within that access to the community, and we host that on Circle. And we've tried different community platforms. What I've learned through that process is it's not the platform necessarily that's going to drive the engagement. And I'll come back to engagement in a second. It's just a place that you're comfortable with and works with your kind of flow and with your members as well. I moved platforms a few times, and probably to the detriment of the engagement in the group. Every time you move, it's fine if you've only got a small handful of people who are engaged. As we've grown, moving platforms, you can have a lot of drop off in terms of engagement. And that was a while ago. So we've started to build that up now. But that definitely was a lesson that I took. And we ended up going from Circle to a few other ones, and then came back full circle, ironically. Then we also offer up to our members access to those quarterly summits. And so a lot of our individual members, they're not the kind of people who are actively spending all their time every day in Circle and posting comments and, interacting and engaging. So this concept of measuring engagement, if you were solely to measure the success of the THD Plus membership by how many people log in and post stuff in Circle every day, you would think it would not be successful. However, members get a lot of value because we've asked them, and in the surveys, yeah, that's nice seeing the community, and they might jump in, but they get a lot of value from attending the summits, and they get a lot of value from our monthly matchups. And so for us, being a B2B industry membership, the third kind of offering that you get as part of the membership is participating in intros. And so we use intros.ai as our platform for that. We used to do a lot of it manually just to check it out, and these days we've just moved over to intro. So that's still early days, but that could be a great value. Well, a lot of people have given that feedback that that's probably what they value, and they spend a lot of time in their emails, so they don't like to go onto another. And I'm kind of the same. I don't like going onto another platform to do things necessarily. I'm already in my emails. If I can get an introduction to somebody else, that's really value adding. So, and I guess last point on that is, for some of our members, they may not even engage at all for 12 months, but feel like they're part of something and want to contribute to the continued growth of Talking Health Tech. So this is something that's been, bootstrapped from the start. It hasn't got government funding, hasn't got any kind of ultimatum of like, hey, buy my software and all that kind of stuff. It's literally for the community, by the community, and a lot of people want to just contribute on an annual basis to do that. And so it's funny, I spend so much time and effort thinking about, let's make sure people are engaging and getting value and all of that. And there's a cohort of members that just don't really care. They just want to pay the thing every year. So that's really nice. I think that's just come off the back of creating quality content that people like and trust and want to thank us for that, which is great.
What are your top 3 goals for the rest of this year?
Top 3. Oh, well, I want to actually have a break in December and January, and I'm not taking a 2-month break necessarily, although that would be a lovely goal. We're starting to build up a team and a capability within Talking Health Tech that it's slowly becoming. I love that we can make Talking Health Tech more than just being directly associated with me, Peter Birch. I don't want it to be the Peter Birch show. I really want it to be for the community, by the community. And so we've got a few really good, like Sophie, our operations and community manager. She's amazing. We've got THD ambassadors that are conducting interviews, which are really interesting. And they're asking questions that I wouldn't have even thought of. And so my first goal would be just to have some time off over the Christmas period. And secondly, continuing to build out this capability within Talking Health Tech of, interviews that are conducted by people other than me. I'm not moving away from the business. I just want to make it, continue to build that trust with our members and our audience and start hearing some other voices within the podcast. And I guess the third goal would be continue to build out because we talked a lot about the membership, like our own podcast and our membership, but also the podcast network. I really want to build some solid foundations around how we produce and some consistency there. Like we've got a lot of different shows and being early, we've done a lot of things that are not scalable, which is fine. That's what you do in the early days. I want to build some structures around it so that we can do things more reliably for our members and perhaps add a few more shows to the network and perhaps then bring some of those hosts together because they're all asking us similar questions too about how long should my episodes be or like who are some good guests. And all. So we could almost build up another community for our network show. So I'm really excited about that journey in the next 6 to 12.
Well, thank you for today, Peter. Where can people find out more about you?
Easiest way for Talking Health Tech is go to talkinghealthtech.com, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn too as an individual, as Peter Birch, or also we've got a pretty engaged company presence on LinkedIn as well.
And I'm Charles Cormier, your host. That was another founderwisdompodcast.com.